Well, obviously, Novak Djokovic is out in Australia. It is a disgrace down under to the world number one, Novak Djokovic. And we'll look at that a lot today and talk about exactly what happened and why. But there's some other news since then that I should bring up. One, a lot of people were saying in France, Djokovic was going to be able to play no matter what. They're changing the law there. They're going to make it. Basically, we possibly, who knows, but we may see this whole thing play out again when the French Open rolls around in May, because now Djokovic will need a vaccination to play there as well, it looks like. So more bad news for Djokovic in that department. Other bad news, it's been reported that Djokovic's sponsor, Lacoste, also French, one of his biggest sponsors, they want to get together with Novak and have a little talk and review the events that occurred down under in Australia, which doesn't sound good. I don't know if they're going to get rid of Novak Djokovic. I doubt that, but who knows what they're going to have to say. But it doesn't sound good. But I want to take you to this. Let's zoom in on what happened with Djokovic in the court, the second court case, and what this means. And this one thing that disturbs me, we really haven't seen a lot from other players. Take a look at this tweet from Alizé Cornet, also French tennis player, and Pierre-Hugues Herbert, who 100% agrees. And this is the part that he said 100%, so I guess he agrees with all of this. I know too little to judge the situation. That's how she starts. That's the part that bothers me. I'll read the rest, though. What I know is that Novak is always the first one to stand for the players, but none of us stood for him. Be strong at Djoker Nole. And then someone, Alexander, who says we stand with Djokovic on his Twitter thing, he says, too little, too late. Indeed, it is too little, too late. And 100% Pierre-Hugues Herbert, he agrees. Now, what I don't like, though, is does he agree with the part that says, I know too little to judge the situation? I feel like that is all too common these days across the board. And Djokovic has a great quote from last year. It was in a comment that I'm going to read to you later towards the end of the show. But Djokovic basically talks about how nowadays we live in a world, it's a lot different than in the past, the last 40, 50 years or so. And he said he called it a comfort world. We live in a comfort world where people are afraid to break from the herd. It's too scary. Things are too good sitting at home watching the Netflix, right? Being fat and happy. It's the way to be these days. And most people are too afraid to try to step outside of the herd is basically what Novak Djokovic said. And that I really think of that when I read that sentence. I know too little to really, what did she say again? I know too little to judge the situation. And unfortunately, that's how most people are. And it's a shame. So let's go to the New York Times. They did a pretty good job covering this. Legal experts call for a rethink of the immigration minister's godlike powers. You see, the Djokovic's showdown in court the second time around was basically rigged against him. There was no way he could win because the judges, and they admitted this much, they were never determining or judging whether or not the Australian government had a good case against Djokovic. They did not. We'll take a look at their case in today's show. It was terrible. It was one of the biggest pieces of crap I've ever seen in my 35 years, 35 and a half or so. Legal experts call for a rethink of the immigration minister's godlike powers. All the judges had to do in that case was review whether or not the immigration minister with his godlike powers had the power to just throw someone out of the country for no good reason. And they determined that he did have that power, and therefore Djokovic lost the case. So let's go right here. In Djokovic's case, the federal judges considered only whether Hawk had applied the law correctly. They did not weigh in on the validity of the decision to cancel Djokovic's visa. Quote, if anything has crystallized from this case, it's that we do need to revisit these powers, said Daniel Estrin, an immigration lawyer in Western Australia. We do need to curtail these powers because I think otherwise, on a global scale, we look somewhat draconian. You can't have a fair administrative law system when a member of the executive, that is, the minister, a member of a political party from the executive branch, can swoop in and make a decision based on pretty much whatever he or she wants. And that really is all you need to know. I watched that entire horribly, dreadfully boring court proceeding, 5-6 hours of it. I fell asleep a few times, but I sat there And a lot of it was very repetitive. And I'm telling you right there, that's really all you need to know. If you don't want to watch it, this is all you need to know. Right below there, they put this tweet up. Djokovic lost because the law was designed to make the minister's decisions immune from judicial review. That is not a good thing. If he had gone before the Supreme Court in the U.S., it wouldn't have happened. Maybe who knows? Maybe we'll see something like that in the U.S. I think the way things are going with Omicron, that this won't be as big of an issue later in the year. But who knows? There is no judicial review in Australia, apparently, when it comes to the executive branch's ultimate executive powers. There are no checks and balances. And if whether you love Djokovic or hate Djokovic, well, if you love him, you probably don't like it. But no one should think this is a good thing. If you're so happy that Djokovic isn't going to break the record, that he doesn't get to defend his title, and looks like maybe he won't get to defend his title in France as well, this is not a good reason to be happy about it. If you hate Djokovic, I got a news flash for you. This is bad. Australia is on a bad track. Because one thing they go on to point out is, and it's in this article, another New York Times article from Damien Cave, how the Djokovic affair finally came to an end. When you're able to just throw someone out of the country and say it's because it could, and this was their case, they cited protests, civil unrest earlier from last year, the middle of last year. Some of them in December of last year, more recent. They said Djokovic's mere presence in the country could inspire civil unrest. So when you're able to just throw people out of the country because it might inspire civil unrest, and there's really no proof of that. They had no proof whatsoever. That was what Djokovic's lawyer was arguing, is that they have no proof of this. And the judge at one point says he doesn't really need physical evidence. They just need evidence. I can't remember the exact wording of the judge, but he said the evidence in this case for the minister, because his powers are so ultimate, right? He has so much power in this case when deciding whether or not to throw someone out of the country. He said he just needs his own judgment and his own common sense, which could mean anything, right? It's his own judgment. He can decide anything that he wants to. That can eventually lead to just throwing out freedom of speech as well. And that is what is in this article later. And I'll show you, they use this tweet right here in that article. This is the point I was making from Mike Stanton. Deportation of a person because of a purported risk as to how others might perceive them, and then act sets a terrible precedent. It can and will be used in the future to justify the suppression of legitimate political expression because others might engage in civil unrest. Hashtag Djokovic. That is a terrible precedent to set. And if you're one of those jerk-offs that's been going around saying, rules are rules, you got to follow the rules, mate, rules won't mean very much when one person in the executive branch can just make up rules on a whim. And as you'll see, they broke their own rules, right? The rule was, I can't believe I didn't look at this earlier, but I actually went through the ATAGI expanded guidance on COVID protocols, and it says if you have recently had a case of COVID-19, you can wait up to 6 months to get vaccinated. That's where the exemption came from. I was shocked that it was 6 months. The NHS, the British National Health Service, their rule is if you'd had COVID recently, you can't get vaccinated for 28 days. They recommend that you wait 28 days after your positive test because it's not good to just go right away and get a vaccination after you've had COVID. Yes, I know the lawyers argued, well, Djokovic never wanted to get the vaccination. He could have done it a long time ago. But it was their rules. Djokovic went by their rules, and then they made up new rules just so they could throw him out so they could avoid losing an election. That is no way to live. That is no way to govern a country. And Australia should be ashamed of itself. Welcome to Coffee Break Tennis. There will be no jokes, no smiling, no laughter on today's disgrace down under edition of Coffee Break Tennis. No laughing, no smiling. We're going to talk about tennis today a little bit, but first we're going to go through all this Djokovic stuff, and then we'll be done with it unless something newsworthy pops up. We're going to do like Djokovic and wait till after the Australian Open to look at this stuff. Here was Djokovic's statement. I respect the court's ruling. I will cooperate with the relevant authorities in relation to my departure from the country. I am uncomfortable that the focus of the past weeks has been on me, and I hope that we can all now focus on the game and tournament that I love. I would like to wish the players, tournament officials, staff, volunteers, and fans all of the best for the tournament. A classy statement there from Novak Djokovic. Anyways, let's dive right into that New York Times article, just in case you missed out on what happened. The day before the Australian Open was set to begin, Novak Djokovic, possibly the greatest tennis player of all time, ran up against a group of determined opponents that no amount of talent, training, money, or willpower could overcome, right? There's literally nothing he could have done. This was predetermined. This was basically determined soon as he tweeted, I got a medical exemption, I'm getting on a plane, and I'm coming to Australia. When people, and John McEnroe, he had a great comment. In fact, I think, you know what? I'll play it for you after we get through this New York Times article. But part of his comment was saying, I understand why Australians were pissed off that Djokovic got this. I would have been too. But the point was, he was following the rules. They gave him the medical exemption. You can criticize Djokovic for plenty of things he did leading up to this, but he was still following the rules. It doesn't matter that he gave an interview to L'Equipe guy, the French journalist that we've heard about so much, because that had nothing to do with the fact that they gave him an exemption and he was on his way. Anyways, he lost his final bid to stay in Australia on Sunday when a 3-judge panel upheld the government's decision to cancel his visa. More broadly, he lost to a government determined to make him a symbol of unvaccinated celebrity entitlement, to an immigration law that gives godlike authority to border enforcement, and to a public outcry and a nation of rule followers over what was widely seen as Mr. Djokovic's reckless disregard for others after he said he had tested positive for COVID last month and met with 2 journalists anyways. Now, that, like I said, that doesn't really matter here. All that matters is that people were mad. Australians were mad. You can't make people live the way the Australian government has and then let a famous person come in. So McEnroe understood it. I understand as well why people would be angry. It's not Djokovic's fault that they gave him the exemption. It continues. Quote, at this point, it's about social norms and enforcing those norms to continue to get people to move in the same direction to overcome this pandemic, said Brock Bastian, a social psychology professor at the University of Melbourne. In this culture, in this country, a sense of suddenly upending those norms has a great cost politically and socially. So what he's saying is the government understood in the executive branch that they would be losing elections if they didn't do the right thing here. They weren't worried about public safety. They weren't worried about the Australian Open at this point. And I'm sure money was a big part of why they were going to give Djokovic the exemption, to have the most complete tournament possible. I've seen some people out there saying, excuse me, let me sip on my Tom Brady electrolyte water. Ooh, that's good. There were some comments out there saying, oh, does Djokovic really add to the quality of the tournament? I don't think the tournament's going to make more money because Djokovic is there. Yeah, taking out your number one player in the world who's going to break the holiest of holies in the GOAT record, 3-way tie of 20. Ending that storyline, I think it makes the tournament a little less interesting. I think that's safe to say. On Sunday morning in Australia, more than 84,000 people watched the live stream, which happens to be way more people than are going to see the Australian Open. By the way, we're going to talk about that later. The crowds are dead, and I have a theory on why there's no one there at the Australian Open watching in person. A couple theories. Talk about that later. I think Rod Laver Arena holds a little less than 84,000 people. So a ton of people tuned in for Djokovic. What they witnessed, and presumably, it says in the article, presumably tuning in from other countries. Well, count me as one. What they witnessed, asleep through some of it. What they witnessed was the saga's bizarre final court scene, a 6-panel video conference with, a Zoom conference. It's symbolic of this horrible, horrible thing we've been living through, the COVID pandemic. A 6-panel video Zoom conference with lengthy arguments in distant rooms of blonde wood about whether the immigration minister had acted rationally in exercising his unlimited powers. It doesn't say that. Exercising his power to detain and deport, which is basically unlimited. So yeah, not much of a case. The Chief Justice, James Alsop, announced the decision just before 6 p.m. after explaining that the court was not ruling on the merits of Mr. Djokovic's stance or on whether the government was correct in arguing that he might influence others to resist vaccination or defy public health orders. By the way, I'd said in a previous video, if 92+% of the country is vaccinated, I don't understand the argument that Djokovic is going to encourage Aussies not to get vaccinated. Well, the lawyer for the government was saying that Aussies may emulate Djokovic's dangerous behavior in not getting vaccinated by not getting their booster, since most of them were already vaccinated. That's how they, so if you had 2 shots, Djokovic was going to convince you not to get a booster. It's a pretty lame argument. Rather, the court simply found that the immigration minister was within his rights to cancel the tennis star's visa for a second time based on that possibility, because he has pretty much unlimited power in this department. In the second round, his lawyers argued that the government had used faulty logic to insist their client's presence would energize anti-vaccination groups, making him a threat to public health. In fact, they argued anti-vaccine sentiment would be aggravated by Djokovic's removal, citing protests that followed the first visa cancellation, which was a great point from Djokovic's legal team, the barrister for Djokovic, also known as lawyer in our part of the world, the U.S. My part, not, I don't know, ours. This is an international crowd out there of highly IQ'd tennis fans out there listening to Coffee Break Tennis. The minister's grasping for straws, said Nikki Wood, one of Mr. Djokovic's lawyers. The alternative scenario that the deportation would empower anti-vaxxers was not considered, he maintained. He kept saying there's 2 sides of the coin, and they're only looking at the one side, which is wrong. You know, they're saying that getting rid of them will calm those anti-vaxxers down, which is obviously ludicrous. If there's people who are anti-vax and they're going to have a riot somewhere, the fact that they deported Djokovic on this flimsiest of flimsies, I think that's going to encourage them more. I think he was right. Mr. Wood also disputed the government's claim that Mr. Djokovic, 34, was a well-known promoter of vaccine opposition. Djokovic has never told anyone not to get vaccinated. All he's ever said is exactly what I say. He said, did he even say personally he wasn't for him? He wouldn't even tell anyone if he had it. And that's probably because he assumed there could be some legal stuff going on in his future when he tried to get into these tournaments and they changed the rules that require every player is vaccinated. I'm guessing. But Djokovic has basically said that he doesn't think it's right for the government to force people to get a vaccine, to get a shot, for any reason, basically. I don't think the government should be forcing people either. They should, as the World Health Organization has recommended, educate, encourage, promote, but do not force people, especially with your army, with the military of Australia. The only comment cited in the government's court filing, he said, came from April 2020, when vaccines had not even been developed. Ever since then, his lawyers added, Djokovic has been very careful to say little about his vaccination status, which he confirmed only in his paperwork for Australia's medical exemption, which was supposed to be private before all this blew up and came out. There was no evidence before the minister that Mr. Djokovic has ever urged any others not to be vaccinated, they wrote in a court filing before Sunday's hearing. Indeed, if anything, Mr. Djokovic's conduct over time reveals his zealous protection of his own privacy rather than any advocacy. All right, it continues. Stephen Lloyd, arguing for the government, told the court it was perfectly reasonable for the immigration minister to be concerned about the influence of a high-profile unvaccinated individual who could have been vaccinated by now, but had not done so. He added that the concerns about Mr. Djokovic's impact went beyond vaccination, noting that Mr. Djokovic had not isolated after he said he tested positive for COVID in mid-December, meeting instead with 2 journalists in Belgrade. The government, Mr. Lloyd said, was worried that Australians would emulate his disregard for the standard COVID rules of safety if he were allowed to stay. I have such a problem with this premise that people in a free society are so stupid that if a guy who makes a mistake and does something dumb is allowed to be in your country, they will all copy him and do the same thing. If you believe this, you're an idiot, right? I'll never understand. I refuse to accept this premise. It's insulting to me. It should be insulting to everyone who lives in a free society. The fact that the government knows better what's good for you, therefore they'll have to keep this person out of the country because he might encourage you to make a mistake because you can't take care of yourself. This is the end. This is the end of Western civilization, basically, if everyone starts adopting this. Or if they take Alizé Cornier's approach and basically say, I was watching Netflix and I had to order tacos and I was going to watch a movie and my friend showed me something cool on Instagram, and I don't really understand what's going on enough to have an opinion on it. But I know I like Djokovic, right? We're in big trouble if this is the majority of people moving forwards. His connection to a cause, whether he wants it or not, is still present. That was the case. That was basically their case, right? Djokovic, we don't have to prove that he's anti-vax. We just know that a lot of people think he is, and they're stupid. So they'll be anti-vax too, right? Even though more than 92% of the country is vaccinated. It's idiotic. Prime Minister Scott Morrison welcomed the decision. Yeah. Skip. Okay, so now they talk about some of these professor of international law at the University of Sydney, talking about how this is a bad precedent. The saga has exposed much long-running dysfunction and injustice in the Australian system, excessively strict, Byzantine, and unpredictable entry rules, paradoxically special treatment through exemptions for the rich and the famous, said Ben Saul. He added that the case showed how the immigration minister's godlike powers were essentially unreviewable by the courts and often led to the unnecessary, obsessive, and cruel detention of foreigners. Human rights lawyers suggested that the reasoning behind the visa cancellation, made in the heat of an election year by a government struggling to manage the latest COVID outbreak, could even lead later to the suppression of free speech. And they have that Twitter thing I read for you earlier. Recent polls, this is why they did it. Recent polls have, in fact, shown that a majority of Australians supported Mr. Djokovic's removal. Even some of the most diehard sports fans have said that the world's top-ranked male player never should have been allowed to come without being vaccinated. But in many ways, the Djokovic drama, with its squabbles over state and federal jurisdiction, its flawed communication from open organizers, and all of the attention paid to a star while the average Australian couldn't find at-home COVID tests in pharmacies, has left nearly everyone involved looking bruised and rather foolish. Players and fans have now been left wondering how this year's Open will be remembered, for the tennis or for the Djokovic affair. I'm going to tell you, for the Djokovic affair. Get that out of here. All right. Karen Sweeney. She's a court reporter in Australia. Did great work covering everything that happened. Oh, by the way, the Prime Minister recently, take a look at this. Prime Minister leaves the door open to Novak Djokovic returning before the ban ends. Yeah, it's official, I guess. It looks like it is from some news reports I've seen. Djokovic will not be allowed to enter Australia for 3 years. The other Grand Slams are probably not going to let him in unless he gets vaccinated. We're talking about possibly the greatest of all time. Instead of seeing how this plays out, the three-way GOAT race. And, I kind of hoped that they would end in a three-way tie before, but not if it's forced by this, right? We don't get to see it play out. That's been robbed from us tennis fans. It's disgraceful. Anyways, Karen Sweeney did a good job covering this stuff. Take a look. This is some of the evidence that the court presented of why it's too dangerous to let Djokovic stay in the country. If Djokovic stays, we're going to see more things like this stuff that happened last year. September 20th, 2021, Victoria records 567 COVID cases and 1 death as construction workers protest mandatory vaccination. So because construction workers, what does Djokovic have? Is Djokovic like he's beloved by construction workers? Since when have construction workers been big Djokovic fans? Violent brawls erupted during protests today in Melbourne's CBD as more than 500 workers tattered outside the CFMEU. I don't know what the CBD is, but I'll tell you what the CFMEU is. It's Construction, Forestry, Maritime, Mining, and Energy Union. Headquarters on Elizabeth Street rallying against mandatory vaccination. Victoria, and then they have a link from ABC News. So some American news outlet reporting on 500 workers, 567 COVID cases. So you can't even connect the two 100%, right? I'm sure there was some COVID spread in this protest, but they shut it down. They shut things down with the military in Australia nowadays. December 4th, 2021, COVID vaccine protests in Melbourne as Kerry Chant warns of uptick in Sydney Omicron case. Take a look at this. This is from the New York Times today. Do you see the case numbers? They're exploding. There's nothing you can do to stop Omicron. It's pretty much accepted all across the world now. Only in Australia are they going to pretend like... And don't be surprised if some players come down with this. Umpires, whoever. People at the Australian Open. Don't be surprised. The lucky ones are like Nadal, Chapeau, who almost was out. He's still in. Guys who just got it before they went in because they don't have to worry about getting it while they're there. Who knows? Maybe... I like how Nadal looked. We're going to talk about tennis. Don't forget today. We will talk about tennis. I thought Nadal looked pretty good. Not his best. Little rusty still. Overall, pretty damn good. Who knows? Maybe someone who is going to be challenging for Nadal, like a Sasha Zverev. Has he had Omicron? Sasha Zverev did have COVID, I believe, in 2020. Anyways, maybe he has to leave the tournament. He comes down with Omicron in the middle of the thing, and Nadal doesn't even have to go through him. Who knows what could happen here? So you get the idea. December 4th, another protest, mostly maskless crowds, marched through Treasury Gardens, shouting, "Sack Dan Andrews," and freedom. Oh, horrible, horrible. They were organizing to protest dictator Dan and shouting freedom. So horrible. So the argument was that Djokovic could have influenced people to do some more of that. All right, so last show we talked about how they were going to change it, and let's just look through some of Karen Sweeney's tweets. She was covering the whole court case, and she kind of sums up a lot of their argument. Quote, "Worried it may lead to other unvaccinated people refusing to be unvaccinated, 8% of the country. Unvaccinated people having their views reinforced or reducing an uptake of boosters," that's how they righted that ship, where I said, like, okay, why are you worried about 8% of the country? Well, how many are boosted? These already vaccinated 92% might not get their booster. Because of this, I consider that Mr. Djokovic's presence, and this is all stuff from the lawyers for the Australian government against Djokovic. I consider Djokovic's presence in Australia may pose a health risk to the Australian community, and that his presence in Australia may foster anti-vaccination sentiment. What else? He says Djokovic's high-profile status and position as a role model, which they've cited evidence like he has sponsorships like Lacoste. Why would he have these sponsorships if they didn't think that people would emulate him? They would emulate him and buy a Lacoste t-shirt. His continued presence in Australia might also encourage others to not comply with public health measures. And below you see, this is an obvious reference to Djokovic's admission he went ahead with the L'Equipe interview after his. So this means that Djokovic is going to inspire everyone in Australia to emulate his behavior and be interviewed while they're COVID positive. By the way, in Djokovic's defense, it should be pointed out that he was asymptomatic the whole time. And he had taken the faster tests, the at-home test that said he was a negative. And he says, after he saw the children the day later, yes, maybe the test result might have been in one day, but he didn't. He was so busy, he didn't see the result till the next day. And then he went on knowing that he was asymptomatic, which, by the way, take a look at this. All right, that's enough of Karen Sweeney. Oh, here's a picture of the construction workers. Looks like more than 500 to me, actually. Looks like a lot. Where is it? This is why this might come back to bite them. Take a look at this. Los Angeles Times. With hospitals reeling, California tells COVID-positive medical workers to stay on the job. Experts say it's a necessary solution to staffing shortages, yet many workers say the policy could be dangerous. So, you see my point here. If you're asymptomatic and you're still testing positive, they can't afford to not have you in Los Angeles, in California. California is the closest thing we have here in the United States to Australia, considering their strictness with the rules surrounding COVID-19. If they're telling them in California that they need to stay, I know Djokovic is not an essential worker. He's not a doctor, obviously. But the point is, how dangerous can it be, the Omicron variant, when if you no longer have symptoms but testing positive, we need you to get back to work so that society can function. That's basically how things are changing here in the U.S., in the U.K., and all over the world. And I think it's going to come back to bite the Australian Open. Couple more. So now Djokovic is out. We see these douchebags like Jamel Hill here in the Atlantic. The selfishness of Novak Djokovic, the top player in men's tennis, is yet another anti-vaccine athlete who'd rather create chaos than get a shot. Here's another one. Oh, what is this guy's name? Big douchebag. Max Boot, I think. Opinion. Djokovic is another whiny sports superstar with an exaggerated sense of entitlement. All right, Max Boot. I just want to remind everyone here, and some of you, maybe you're angry with me right now. Maybe you already stopped watching the video. Some of you were the same, commenting when I reported last year, or 2 years ago, 2020, news that the Trump administration in the U.S. was starting something called Operation Warp Speed. And arguably, this is where most of the vaccines people are using have come from, right? That is the result of Operation Warp Speed. At the time, I was saying this is great news. This is going to make it possible for the world to move on from the pandemic. We're going to be able to watch tennis again. And some people were mad that I was saying, oh, you're pro. You want everyone to get vaccinated. I was saying, no. We're going to have a tool, right? Someone like Djokovic, is never going to need that to survive. At least not now. He's too young, way too healthy. All these tennis players, as John McEnroe points out, when he hosted the Laver Cup as a captain, when he was a captain of the Laver Cup, the top 5 men were there, all of them except Nadal, and all of them were unvaccinated. Only Djokovic was the one who stood up for what he thought was right. The other ones just went along to get along. Anyways, so at the time, people were critical and saying, yeah, Matt, well, they're rushing along. Operation Warp Speed is too fast. It's not safe. Take a look for yourself. Dr. Fauci says, this is Newsweek, August 14th, 2020, Trump's Operation Warp Speed suggests reckless speed. The Miami Herald, will Trump's Operation Warp Speed rush the science of a coronavirus vaccine? Los Angeles Times again. Speed over safety in the quest for a coronavirus vaccine is a recipe for disaster. Operation Warp Speed could expedite a coronavirus vaccine, but cutting corners is dangerous if it glosses over questions of safety and efficiency. These same people are now telling us that everyone must have that vaccine that they criticized before it even existed. They're saying that everyone has to have it or else we can't go on with normal life, or else Novak Djokovic can't fulfill his destiny and go for his opportunity to be the greatest tennis player of all time. So just remember that next time you hear one of these douchebags saying he broke the rules or everyone should get it, right? Most of these people were telling us it was dangerous, it was bad. All right, let's look at what tennisworldusa.org's got for us. Serbian president comes to defense of Djokovic. I thought it was interesting what he had to say. If you want to forbid Novak Djokovic to win the Australian Open trophy for the 10th time, why didn't you return him immediately? Why didn't you tell him that it was impossible to get a visa? Why did you mistreat him? Why did you torture him as well as his family in a nation that is free and proud? Is all this necessary to win the elections and please your public? A president of a small country has appeared who has the courage to say that to one great prime minister of a large country, I can because I'm telling the truth, and you know I'm telling the truth. They often preach to us about the rule of law. Well, you can imagine what it would look like if a minister in Serbia annulled court decisions. They showed us what an independent judiciary looks like, and they also showed us what an irrelevant judiciary looks like, because all the power there is in the hands of the executive. Bastards. All right, let's talk about tennis. That's enough. No laughing, no smiling. Dead serious. Where's the coffee? It's empty. Great. We'll read some comments and talk about this a little bit more, but let's move on to the tennis, and then we'll move on to the comments. First off, the crowds. There's been reported that there have been tons of refunds. So I'm guessing part of that is every Serbian in Australia wants a refund, and they are not going to the Australian Open. Here you go. Nakashima and Berrettini, almost no one there. Later in the day, Vamos Rafa. Take a look at that crowd. Does that look like a Rafa Nadal crowd? Now, this was the night match, which are always packed. Pretty weak for Sasha Zverev. Very good match. Very enjoyable match with Altmaier, the old Meyer. I like watching. I liked Altmaier's game. He's got a great serve. Pretty good at the net. One-handed backhand, not the most effective, but fun to watch. I think he was going up the line too much to the point where, maybe he would have been better off slicing a little more or taking it cross-court. Sasha Zverev, even though a lot of people have him as the favorite, I think I heard, I can't remember, some ESPN commentators saying Zverev was the favorite, some others saying Medvedev was the favorite. Don't look past Rafa. He's set up nice to take advantage of this situation. And you don't have to worry about Rafa coming down with Omicron, even though, as we showed you earlier in the New York Times, the case rates are exploding. There's nothing like this in Australia until now. So my theory, oh, by the way, we do have one good crowd. Take a look. Kokkinakkis. We're going to talk about him. We're going to talk about Karatsev, because these are a couple players that people were worried about for Rafa, right? I saw a meme recently showing that they'd won their tune-up events, right? I guess Karatsev in Sydney, and Kokkinakkis, the Cockmeister. I think that is actually his Twitter or his Instagram name for real. Cockmeister won in Adelaide. And he had a great crowd out there, but he was out in straight sets. So real quick, before we talk about the Cockmeister, I'm going to talk about why I think, obviously the Serbians are boycotting the tournament. And I think it's this heavy-handed government, right? They limited the crowd. You know, you look at that picture, it's like the commentators were saying like, oh yeah, the crowds are a little down because they've limited us to 50% capacity. Yeah, well, 50% doesn't mean 10% capacity because that's about what it looks like. I think that after the government, we see these spikes. We know how the government handles things in Australia. And we know that they've already cut the crowds. They've limited to 50% capacity. I think a lot of people just think, I might as well get my refund now before they cancel the whole tournament. They ban crowds completely. Who knows? Get the money out while getting the money out is good. I think that's what is going on here. On top of that, all the Serbians are saying, go straight to hell. Like Lajovic's match, when he beat Fucsovics, you heard a lot of people cheering for Fucsovics. You didn't hear any Serbians going crazy like you normally would, which tells me there's not a lot of Serbians there. Anyways, so take a look. Kokkinakkis, 6'2", 6'3", 2-0 down here, struggling to hold on. And even these green goblins behind him who are there just for him, they can't get him going. Nothing could get Kokkinakkis going. And the one thing I noticed was very interesting was he asked, for the umpire to look at the balls. He said the balls are, they're not bouncing. They're slow. They're soft. It's not moving. The fact is that the conditions, are a lot cooler and slower, even though it's a pretty fast court. A lot slower than in Adelaide. And what the commentators were saying, which was a great point, is that Kokkinakkis, he came straight from Adelaide on Saturday, and on Sunday he rested, and then on Monday he's got his match. He should have been out there Sunday no matter how exhausted he felt, just to get a feel for these conditions, get a good 30-minute hit in, and then get off the court. You don't have to, kill yourself out there, but get a feel. He constantly looked tangled up. He was misjudging the bounce, the speed of the court, and he was very frustrated. You might have thought it was because he played too much right before, but it didn't necessarily look like his body was letting him down, like he was tired. It just looked like he couldn't get used to the situation, to the court conditions, and he was complaining about it, obviously, so that's definitely the case. And Yannick Hanfmann, who amazingly is a 30-year-old guy, been around a while. This is his first time winning a main draw match at a Grand Slam. So good for him. Obviously, he came through qualifying, so he had already been there, got used to the conditions. Bad luck for Kokkinakkis. The fact that he won a tournament and had a good run before that, the week before, I think overall positive for Kokkinakkis. Very talented player. They were asking Nadal after he won his match, if you have to play Kokkinakkis, you're likely to play him. He has to win still. They kind of gave him the win before he went out there. What are you going to have to do, Rafa? And Rafa said, well, he's always been very good. He's been very unlucky with injuries, but this has always been a really talented guy, and it's going to be a challenge for me, which Nadal would say about anyone, of course, but I believe him there. You see there, Kokkinakkis hit some sweet winners. We see what he was all about, winning a lot this last couple weeks. 22 winners. Some of them were pretty nice, pretty incredible shots he hit. Got the crowd going, but in the end, 42 unforced errors, and you can see the crowd's pretty much empty. Like, they got out of there pretty fast after that one. So that was the story of that match. Rafa no longer has to worry about that guy. He's going to have to play Yannick Hanfmann up next. Let's see. Karatsev, another person they were worried about, who also won a tournament leading up. The guy barely made it. Take a look. 4 hours and 52 minutes. Karatsev won 6-4 in the fifth against the Spanish Jerry Seinfeld, Jaume Munar. Very good match. Very entertaining match. Don't know how much Karatsev is going to have left, especially for Rafa. So a couple threats that people were saying, oh no, Rafa's in trouble. They're already eliminated. Maybe not Karatsev. Maybe he's going to be able to recover. So he's going to need an easier second round. Do not be surprised if he doesn't make it past the second round. He looked pretty drained. He was up 4-1, I think, in the fifth set. And then he started falling apart. And then I think he was serving 4-3. It looked like he was going to have that break disappear too. And then he just dug deep and hit some big winners. Big serve, hit the open court, step in, take it early. I love Aslan Karatsev's game, so I hope he keeps going. But who knows? Look at that. 87 winners, 107 unforced errors. Very interesting here. 188 points to 184 in favor of Spanish Jerry Seinfeld, who overall won more points, didn't miss a whole lot, way less unforced errors. But Karatsev, when it mattered most, he was able to step up with the weapons and the firepower, and that's what you need in this sport if you want to do great things, like Karatsev did here last year, losing to Djokovic in the semifinal, I believe. So maybe this will be his year because he won't have to play Djokovic thanks to the corrupt dictatorship of the Australian executive branch. When he won, Karatsev looked so exhausted. It was pretty funny. Karatsev, to me, is one of the funniest characters because he does so little. Take a look at his face. He looked at the umpire and gave this kind of thumbs up after he shook hands. Then he walked around and, you do like Djokovic would throw his arms up in the air and throw the COVID at everyone, his whole thing he does. And Karatsev goes out there and like claps his racket for like half a second. Says, thank you. Goes right to the bench and collapses like this. Then you can tell he doesn't want to give autographs when he's getting out of there. But eventually he's like, okay, I give you a racket. You take a racket. And the guy's like, right on, I got a racket. And then he's like, oh, it's broken. Oh, man. And then he did sign a couple autographs for some people with Russian flags because, they have Russian flags. Okay. Moving on to Rafa. I think the most interesting to me in Rafa's match was this. Take a look at Rafa's dad. I mean, he's really masking up. Not only, you hear people criticize, like, I was at Taco Bell and the person had their mask with their nose hanging out. So dangerous. In fact, I saw a review recently saying, I loved this restaurant, but someone at the front counter had their nose poking out of their mask. They better pull that mask up. Okay. Well, Rafa's dad, he pulls it over his eyes too. Take a look. He really gets the full coverage. See everyone else in the box here for Rafa? You can see their eyes. Rafa's dad, he covers mouth, nose, and los ojos as well. This is the stat for me that summarizes the match. First and third sets were pretty easy. Second set, Rafa was spraying a little bit, and Giron was playing his heart out the whole time, really. But he had opportunities to exploit because Rafa was missing a little too much in that second set. But when it was time to close things out, he sure did in Rafa style. I think he hit on set point. Could have been the first set, but maybe it was the second set. I don't know. He hit a pretty sweet, run outside and hit that forehand up the line thing that Rafa likes to do. A little banana action. Here's the stat for me, though. Take a look. Set number one, Nadal is 1.18 meters behind the baseline, and Giron is closer to the baseline, Marcus Giron. And then he gets pushed back as Nadal moves in. Even though Nadal was spraying a little more, he was bringing more pressure in that second set, and then you saw it play out in the third set. All right, let's move on to Nadal&Zverev, who is most people's favorite on this side of the draw now. Zverev's second points won. They pointed this stat out saying, look how much better it is than in 2020. But one very intelligent commentator, he pointed out that that's not good enough. Think about what Rafa would be doing on second serve win percentage at a tournament where he wins it. Think about Roger. I think the last time Roger won the Australian Open, he was averaging closer to 60% win on the second serve. So 52%, that might not cut it. Zverev threw in plenty of double faults, including in the first set tiebreak. Luckily for him, he hit a couple aces. Pretty good. It's hard to fault Zverev. He looks very good. And Altmaier was playing really hard. Really, really hard. In fact, take a look at this. This is very rare in tennis. The ball, right? Zverev hit a ball that slices back over to his side. Normally, you're screwed when that happens. Altmaier got up there so fast, he was able to reach over the net. This is the only time you're allowed to do it. If the opponent hits a shot on your side of the net and it bounces back to their side, you are allowed to reach over and chase it. And then he hit it to the left away from Zverev for the winner. And that same commentator who was pointing out that that's not a high enough second serve win percentage also pointed out something very interesting that I've never even thought of before. He said, if this happens to you in your club match, mate, reach over and hit it into the net. That way Zverev has no chance of getting the ball at all. You are actually allowed to do that. If the ball hits your side of the court, spins backwards back to the opponent's side, you are allowed to reach over, and you are also, which I never thought of before, but it makes sense, you are allowed to hit it straight into your opponent's side of the bottom of the net so that they will have no bounce and no play on the ball whatsoever. That was a pretty entertaining match as well. Anyways, tomorrow, we won't have to talk about Djokovic again unless something happens, but I don't think we'll be talking about him too much for the rest of the tournament. As Rafa and Nadal pointed out, there are great legends that come and dominate our sport, but none of them are bigger than the Australian Open event itself. The Australian Open is always going to be great unless the government messes it up. But hopefully it continues, and it's always going to be one of the 4 majors and worth watching. So we're going to go with the Rafa rule there, and even though it's a travesty, it's disgraceful what they did to Djokovic, we're still going to cover the tournament, and we're going to love it, and we're going to enjoy it. All right, let's take a look at some comments. First, persona non grata. The presenter, I guess he's talking about me, keeps telling again and again that COVID infections are happening even though the majority of the population is vaccinated. This is wrong. The vaccine protects from serious infection and reduces the stress of the health system. Yeah, that is true. The point of the vaccine is not to prevent people from getting it. It is to prevent serious infection and reduce your chances of being in the hospital, right? Yeah, that is true, but that's not exactly what I was saying, persona non grata. My point was that they're trying to make it sound like if you're not vaccinated, you're going to be spreading it all over. And obviously, when you got over 100,000 cases a day now in Australia and 92+%, obviously that doesn't stop the spread. That is the point. Yes, it will lower your viral load somewhat, but do you think Djokovic had a considerably high viral load when he was asymptomatic and doing the interview with Mr. Liquip? I don't think so. I think the viral load was pretty low. If you're asymptomatic, that alone indicates that you have a lower viral load. Anyways, Fire Girl Australia says, piss off, mate. He did not meet entry requirements to get in, so he lied to get into the country. Got caught, now he must cop the consequences. Anyone else would be kicked out, tennis player or garbage man. Follow the country's laws if you wish to enter. End of story. Take a look. Here we go. Here's the rule from the ATAGI, Australian Technical Advisory Group on Immunization Guidelines. Under temporary exemptions, an exemption should not be given when an alternative COVID-19 vaccine is available and when completing the medical exemption form, all COVID-19 brands must be selected. Valid reasons for a temporary exemption include, and I'm not going to read all of them, I'm going to skip straight down to a PCR-confirmed SARS-CoV-2 infection, where vaccination can be deferred until 6 months after the infection. According to their rules, Novak Djokovic could wait 6 months until he gets his vaccine. This is from the NHS in the UK. I'm currently ill with COVID-19. Can I get the vaccine? People currently unwell and experiencing COVID-19 symptoms should not receive the COVID-19 vaccine until they have recovered. You can have the vaccine 28 days after you had a positive test for COVID-19 or 28 days after your symptoms started, so you may need to wait. Now, it doesn't specify anything on asymptomatic, but pretty clearly here, and obviously this is the UK, you can have a vaccine 28 days after you had a positive test for COVID-19. Bottom line is, that's where the exemption came from. Let's play the clip of John McEnroe. I just remembered that, and then we'll read the rest of the comments and get out of here.
You're talking about a guy that was about to potentially break Roger Federer and Rafael Nadal's record, and that he was willing to go to these lengths. I don't want to get vaccinated, but I'm going to do whatever it takes. Here's what my question. He plays the Open. It's announced soon after that you have to be vaccinated in order to get to Australia. By the way, 4 of the 5 top male players were not vaccinated at the U.S. Open. At the Laver Cup, where I was at, they weren't vaccinated. Tsitsipas was not vaccinated. Medvedev was not vaccinated. Rublev was not vaccinated. Those 3 guys got vaccinated. What was Novak thinking or doing during this period of time? Was he just deciding that, okay, either I'm not going to play or I'm going to, they're going to change the law? That's one of the questions I would have to him. And then all of a sudden, mid-December, I mean, you can't wait to mid-December, and then suddenly you don't try to get this, right? Suddenly he got COVID, and that allowed him to get the exemption. What?
Yeah.
And, okay, let's assume that's all, that he wasn't going to play, but then suddenly he got COVID and then he got an exemption. He can play. You can't tell him after he flies all the way there. The government, the idea that the government, these people weren't in cahoots with each other. I'm sorry.
There was something to the tweet.
I don't buy into that one. They all knew what was going on. On the plane, everyone started going up in arms. You heard Darren on the opening. He said he was, he quarantined for 28 days. 14 days when he got to Melbourne. Then the equivalent of going to New York to Miami, he gets quarantined 14 more days.
Yeah.
Now, that's why I get why they're up in arms, okay, but nonetheless, they granted this exemption. You can't do this after that. It's a joke.
It is a joke, Johnny Mac. It's an absolute joke. He pointed out, Darren Cahill's an Australian citizen, so I guess they were much more strict on Australian citizens and make him do all this 28 days. Jeez. Outrageous. Anyways, so he's saying, I understand why Australians would be mad, and I agree with John McEnroe on that. But his point was, you gave him the exemption. You can't do this after you told him it was okay. What else did he say? It was a long sound bite. I thought it was interesting how he said all these guys were unvaccinated, and he's basically kind of saying what I've been saying. Only Djokovic had the nerve to stand up for what he thought was the right thing here. He risked it all, basically. Anyways, so Chris McKinstry says, yeah, well, you know what? I think what Tsitsipas says is really the best way to put it. And take a listen.
I think Tsitsipas said it best. He's playing by his own rules.
Well, he took a chance and he got burned, but that was he's not playing by his own rules. Those were the rules. The rules where you get vaccinated.
So that's what you could say. When I was talking about last time, he tried to have his cake and eat it too. McEnroe put it better. He took his chances and he got burned. Right? He did everything he could. He knew he wasn't going to get vaccinated, so he did everything he possibly could to try to get in there and defend his title. I'll keep playing the clip.
That if it was end of black or white, okay. Or you get an exemption. Or not just end of story. He wasn't playing by his own rules. He's playing by their rules. He got the exemption. You can not agree with it, but that's what happened. He was able to.
This is no way to go through the rest of his career. I mean, how sustainable is this?
This shows you how deeply he believes this. The fact that he was willing, he was going to beat these other two guys, be considered the greatest ever. Now all of a sudden, everywhere he goes, they're going to be on him in a way again. He's going to be the bad guy even more than he's ever been. Chrissy, go ahead.
Tennis Australia, the state of Victoria okayed it. I mean, he had two independent panels that approved his medical exemption. I mean, that was the case to get to play the tournament, to get into Victoria, to enter the tournament. All of a sudden he goes to the border, and their border is saying, I'm sorry, we don't have that rule. And we didn't know anything about it. And there is such a disconnect between those three powers that it's hard to believe. I'm sorry, maybe it's
hard to believe they didn't know. Say this.
It's hard to believe they didn't know. That was another thing McEnroe said in the first one. Obviously, they were in cahoots with each other. It all came down to as soon as he got on that plane, after he said, I got my exemption and I'm coming, and people were mad. It was all political. Anyways, let's go back to the comments and we'll get out of here. Let's start with Zoran Milojevic. Probably a Serbian guy. He quotes Djokovic from, when was this? This was November 20th. 2021. And Djokovic is saying what I was talking about in the beginning of the show. Look, we don't have to talk about it all night. I think it's the same for every area in life. I mean, regardless of whether it's tennis, another sport, or anything else in life. We are a society, a comfort society. It is better to join the herd than to come out of the herd and say, people, this is not fair, this is not true, I will raise my voice and try to fight for someone else who is less fortunate than me. Many people, unfortunately, the vast majority, choose easier. He chooses to just take care of himself and not others. And since we are part of an individual sport, it is somewhat even more pronounced in our case. While I don't mind that, I know who I am and what is fair, and I know that I fight that. I'm a thorn in the side of many because I'm trying to expose that monopoly that has been in tennis for many years. He's talking about trying to make a players' union. Few people talk. Here you see the sports media, tennis media. They don't talk at all about how many players are making a living from this sport. Everyone talks about how much Djokovic, Federer, and Nadal earn. But there is talk about the fact that tennis is the third most popular sport in the world, and that it is out of 10 in the world in terms of earnings. So it's just barely number 10 in earnings, even though it is number 3 in popularity compared to other sports. Barely 150, maybe 200 players live from this sport in men and women's tennis. Come on, tell me, 200 or 150 players in any other sport globally and see how much they earn. That organization of players, the PTPA, and everything we try to achieve through this initiative and what we are trying to achieve and why we're advocating it is precisely because of these guys and girls who are trying to make their voice heard. But unfortunately, they do not listen to them because the elite will always elevate the elite, and that's how it goes in a circle, and that's why there is a little one from Serbia to get involved in this story. He's not exactly talking about this, but I think it applies. And you can make the case, well, is Djokovic really standing up for the little guy who doesn't want to get vaccinated, or is he standing up for himself? Sure, but the point is, when he sees something that's not true, like this case that he's a danger, like this case that everyone must be required to get it, it always should have been a thing where if you're vulnerable at all, because of your age, because of health conditions, because you're overweight, whatever, you absolutely should go and get that vaccine. I would recommend it to anyone. But if you're young and one of the healthiest athletes in the world, that's crazy. There's plenty of people that these vaccines and boosters especially have been wasted on that could have gone to other parts of the world where they don't have any vaccines, right? We should have been trying to protect the vulnerable across the world with this supply that we have in the Western world. And instead, we're trying to get 12-year-olds to take boosters. Hit the music. It's ludicrous. They have no case. Let's finish up really quick. William Little. It's just sad, man. They're seriously pretending he poses a risk. By that logic, everyone in Australia poses a health risk due to the transmission happening in similar numbers despite vaccination for COVID-19. Vaccination will help a ton with your symptoms and protect you if you get it, but its effectiveness at preventing transmissibility is questionable at best. I don't think he got COVID in December. I think the Serbian government arranged a positive test for him while he was in Belgrade so he could play the AO. He should still be allowed to play, because the two medical panels cleared him and said he was low risk, like 0.01 of catching it again. He just got it back in December 20. Oh, obviously he had it in 2020 for real. That's what he's saying. And passing to people. Yeah, that's true. That's what they said, and that was presented in court. He has a 0.01% chance. He was a 0.01% threat as far as spreading, which is why I had to make this ridiculous case saying, well, he's going to encourage other people to be dangerous. Yeah, that's BS. Good comment, William Little. Anandi S. Awesome to have you back, Matt. You are the GOAT of tennis content. Thank you. Noli's ordeals have become too much to digest, even for someone that next time I gotta tell the story of when I met Djokovic's dad. All he said to me was thank you like 5 times in a row. That was it. I'll tell it next time. Not a diehard fan. It's getting to be a bit much now. Australia shouldn't have given him the exemption in the first place. Treating him this way post-arrival is disgusting, trying to make an example in a show. And he didn't help himself with his boneheaded actions right before contracting. Geez, what a nonstop drama. To go back to William Little really quick, I don't doubt that it's possible the Serbian government faked his test. I don't think so. It doesn't. I would lean towards trusting Djokovic here, but honestly, in Serbia, if you fake the COVID test so Djokovic can play the Aussie Open, you probably get like the Medal of Honor. You get the equivalent of the Presidential Medal of Freedom or Medal of Honor in Serbia. Speedy 500 says, in defense of the Aussie government, it was Tennis Australia that worked with local government to give Novak the medical exemption. The only government body in Australia authorized to give a medical exemption on a visa is the federal government. Granted, it wasn't Novak's error, but an error was made. Alex Hawk corrected the error. No one likes to see anyone go through what Novak went through, but the right conclusion was made. There was a letter that went out to all AO players shortly after that comment thing we read that Djokovic said back in the 20th of November. This is the 29th. Stated testing positive for COVID in the past would not be accepted as medical exemption by the federal government. But if you just got positive, you're allowed to not be vaccinated. So that rule superseded the other one, but that is true what Speedy 500 said. It's a tough one. Don't let me forget to tell my Djokovic's dad story next time. And we will be back tomorrow to talk more about the tennis. See ya!